Hello everyone, I'm Ron Grant coming to you live and direct from Tortola in the Virgin Islands. You're watching 284 Media. Thank you so much for your time. The British Virgin Islands will welcome assessors from the International Monetary Fund and the Caribbean Financial Task Force who arrive in the BVI this week to conduct the fourth round of mutual evaluation. Now, the mutual evaluation process assesses a country's compliance with international standards and the effectiveness of its anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing regime in line with the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force. Joining me today to discuss all of this is Mr. Glenford Malone, who is the Deputy Managing Director of the BVI Financial Services for Regulations. We'll be right back after a quick commercial break.
Rashford made it. Manchester United have come from behind to lead.
At home or on the go, watch CCT Live. Download our app and carry your favorite TV shows, news, or live sports anywhere you go. Visit cctbvi.com/live, select your package, and tune in.
Welcome back, viewers, and thank you for your time. As promised, I'm joined by Mr. Glenford Malone, who is the Deputy Managing Director of Regulations at the BVI Financial Services Commission. Mr. Malone, thank you so much for your time and welcome to our studios.
And thank you to 284 Media for giving us this opportunity to discuss what we think is a very critical point in time for the BVI in terms of its assessment. And again, thank you for having me here today.
You're most welcome. Critical indeed. Now, the assessment 10-member team comprises experts from IMF and the Cfatf and will conduct a thorough examination of the BVI's AML CFT regime over a period of several weeks. I want to talk about this actual process because the assessment will cover a range of areas, including the legal and institutional framework, the adequacy of the BVI's AML and CFT laws, as well as its regulations, of course, the effectiveness of its supervisory and regulatory bodies, and the BVI's track record in investigating and, of course, prosecuting such cases. Before we get into that, tell us about the purpose of the mutual evaluation.
Well, let me just take a bit of step back. Actually, the evaluation was supposed to occur from as far back as 2017.
Okay.
And we know what occurred in 2017,
yes.
So it got pushed back, or pushed forward or backward, whichever you look at it, and then was supposed to happen in 2020, and then we know what happened in 2020.
Yes.
So we're here now. They're going to be here for 2 weeks. The purpose of their assessment, as you rightfully say, is to look at how we comply with the Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendations. They'll be looking at what we call technical compliance issues. For example, we pass laws. They'll look at that, see whether the law says what they're supposed to say. They'll look at really and truly how do we implement the laws. So we say it is a crime to launder money. Do we investigate persons? Do we prosecute them in line with what they would term or risk that's within the BVI? What we have been doing, engaging the IMF since about April last year. Well, the IMF, as part of what we call a global network of FATF type institution that assist. We are a member of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. And the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force would undergo customarily or mutual evaluation. The IMF, as an associate member of that institution, also allows for them to do mutual evaluations on behalf of CFATF. And they have done them in what we would have termed the third round, in this fourth round as well. And in negotiation with the IMF, we agreed the IMF could assist CFATF. It's a peer review. So you have individuals from CFATF member countries as well as IMF personnel who will come look at our jurisdiction. And these are highly qualified people who their profession is really in background of prosecution, financial regulation, what we call financial investigation agencies, highly qualified person. So we've been engaging with them over the course of the past few months. We submitted a number of documents to them. They've submitted stuff to us. We've looked at it, and we've provided responses. So now it's all culminating in what they call 2 weeks on site.
Okay.
So they come on site and they interview what we call private and public sector. So the public sector would be the normal people you would think, Royal Virgin Islands Police Force, Financial Services Commission, financial investigation agencies, the Governor's Office, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, Virgin Islands Shipping Registry, International Tax Authority, Airport Authority, Port Authority. So you would understand from there's a wide swath of scope. So a lot of times when we look at these things, everyone says, well, this is financial services related. I think I mentioned one financial service related institution.
That's correct. You more so spoke about the myriad of other agencies that would assist in this project.
Exactly. And I would say those agencies and the BVI have been collaborating for the past, I would say, since 2016 when we did our first national risk assessment.
Okay.
All of the agencies been collaborating and cooperating. We've had significant political buy-in by successive governments who have been putting resources behind the process so we can demonstrate a significant level of compliance when the team comes on site.
I have to ask you, Mr. Malone, how do we prepare for this and what are some of the expectations?
Yeah, the preparation is, I've been at this, frankly speaking, in terms of mutual evaluation since 2008 when the BVI was last assessed. Evaluation involves all of the agencies getting together and looking at the system in the BVI, for example, and figuring out what it is we need to change, how do we need to build up the system. So you take, for example, I'll use my institution of Financial Services Commission. We would look at things like the regulatory legislation or the BVI Business Companies Act and determine, okay, what things do we need to change?
Okay.
And when we need to do those changes, we then go to the industry and we have consultation, and then we will make those changes based on those consultations. And likewise for all of the relevant agencies. So we have a lot ongoing. Like I said, we did a number of risk assessment 2016. We did 2 in 2021 for money laundering, 1 for terrorism financing, and out of those came a number of recommendations.
Okay.
And all the agencies were responsible for dealing with those recommendations. We have a unit which is responsible for monitoring all the agencies' implementation on those recommendations. So as a jurisdiction, we've been looking at this for a number of years. We've been preparing. At the top level in the BVI, we got what we call the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee, which is a top level chaired by the Premier, who looks at the policy issues, the strategy issues, provide directions, where there needs to be resources that they look at for those resources and allow the system to function appropriately.
Understood. Now, what is the end result? And you mentioned all the persons involved, but in the final analysis, what is going to be or should be the end result?
Well, at the end of the day, just to give you how the process works, so we engage with the IMF, Cfatf. We send them documents. Now they're at the stage with the on-site. After the on-site, at the last day, they'll sort of give what we call a closeout meeting. Maybe I should take a bit of step back because I talked about the public sector, but
yes,
they are the private sector.
Correct.
Which is what we call the financial institutions or the designated non-financial business and professionals like your lawyers, your real estate agents, and the like. So they'll be interviewing a number of those people. So they'll be interviewing some of the banks, they'll be interviewing some of what you would refer to as the trust companies.
Correct.
We would call them trust and company service providers. They'll look at the MPOs, interview a few MPOs. They'll look at lawyers, real estate agents, etc. So they'll ask them questions around, okay, how do you implement the laws the BVI have in place? So they'll ask those type of questions. When they finish ask those questions about the public and private sector over the 2 weeks, we'll have like a closeout meeting where they'll tell us what, at the top level,
what their findings
are. Then when they leave the jurisdiction, they would have 2 months to prepare a first draft report. So that first draft report is then prepared. In between, there'll be discussion with the BVI if they want additional information, if they want additional clarification. That first draft report is only sent to the BVI.
Understood.
So it's sent to the BVI. The BVI have an opportunity to look at that first draft and determine, well, what's incorrect here? What things that we don't think the assessment team got right? And we will provide a response. And then there'll be a second, and then there'll be a third draft. The third draft is the one which is we call sort of like the no change draft.
Okay.
Once it hits the third draft, That's a draft that will be considered by what we call the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force plenary. This is the decision maker who would, member countries would look at the report, they would make comments, and they would decide whether it satisfies the requirements. At that plenary, we are allowed to go and we can make arguments as to where we think the assessors get it wrong. Usually at the plenary, you have maybe 2 or 3 issues that you discuss, main issues. There's always going to be things in the report that you're not going to like. You're not going to agree with the assessment team, but you don't argue some of them because
Understood.
you have a very limited amount of time at plenary. I think for each report is about 4 hours to make your arguments. So you narrow it down into the ones that you think are more important to you, and then plenary will decide. And after that, the report then will likely be made public. The plenary that our report is going to be heard is going to be November 2023, this November plenary for Cfatf. And after that, the report goes into, again, a bit technical, but it goes into what the FATF calls quality and consistency. So it goes out to what they call all of the global network.
Okay.
Everybody who's a member of a FATF style body and the FATF. And if everybody is comfortable, then the report becomes published, become an official report at that point.
Now I have to ask you, because you mentioned about the support of successive governments. The BVI government has made a significant a number of progress in really strengthening the AML and CFT regime over the past several years. And the assessors visit, of course, it represents the opportunity to showcase these efforts. We would all, of course, remember the most recent, the final sitting of the House of Assembly, and a number of legislations were passed. I have to ask you to explain to us some of the recent legislations that would be in line with the Financial Services Commission and bringing up to standard. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and that was a very unique circumstance. So, like I said, we've been engaged with the assessment team. We submitted our response that we would say for technical compliance. Here are the laws, here where we think we met. Then the assessment team came back and said, by the way, we don't think you really meet this section or maybe that section, some of which I think we disagreed with.
Okay.
But having been in this process such a long time, you know, your best bet is to change it to the way the assessment team sees it in some regard, and so you could get it correct. So we looked at that and we engaged the Honorable Premier and made a request that he consider doing a special sitting or a sitting before the dissolution, because we all know the circumstances surrounding that. And before that, what we did is we developed layman term, we developed a spreadsheet, setting out exactly what it is the assessment team said, what it is we want to change, the legislation we want to change it with a draft, and we had a sit-in with the legislature unofficially to explain the circumstances. And that is where all of those legislation, many of them were simply one section that needed to change.
Okay.
Some of them, I think the most substantial one, longest one probably was the Limited Partnership Act, which was just putting in something that we incorrectly took out a few years ago. So again, that's how, as a jurisdiction, collaboration and partnership work.
And it's very important.
Very, very, very important. The government was on board from day one and said anything we needed to do, let them know, and they allowed us to make those changes. And you know, it was last minute, but what happens is any change that you as a jurisdiction make, this is procedurally how the assessment works. Any change you make at a jurisdiction must be made before that assessment team leaves the jurisdiction.
Understood.
So we were making sure that we were making the changes and we will get credit for them in the assessment, because we saw frankly speaking, we saw some of the interpretation that the assessment team made, and we knew if we went to plenary to argue some of them, we likely would have lost.
Understood.
So we made the changes, which was good, and we would get credit for them in the technical compliance and throughout the whole assessment.
All right. I have to touch on, of course, the FATF requirement. I want you to speak to that. And for persons who may not know what some of these jargons or abbreviations are, please explain.
Yeah, we in this business so long, we use them interchangeably.
Yes.
But think about it from your day-to-day perspective. I mean, I'm only using the bank as an example because we all go to the bank. So you walk into the bank and you have let's just say you have 10,000, 15,000 in cash, and you walk into the bank and you said, I want to open an account. Person says, okay, they give you a form. You have to fill out the form. The form asks you a myriad of questions. You know, your place of birth, your date of birth. They ask you to bring in references. They ask you about previous bank accounts. They ask you where you get the money from. They ask you about your source of funds, your source of wealth. All of these now is what the Cfatf requirement says. In a nutshell, the Cfatf requirement says you as a financial institution need to identify and verify the person in front of you. So Ron goes into the bank needs to know that Ron is who he said he is. So they ask him for copies of identification documents. All of that is in the Cfatf requirement. So Ron comes in, he does that, or just take it a bit differently. Ron comes in, you ask for all of those documents. He has this $20,000 in cash he wants to deposit. The more you ask him questions, he says, I don't want to answer all of these questions. He takes up his $20,000 and he goes out through the door. Now the bank has to think in its mind, wait a minute, Ron attempted to do a transaction. Why did Ron not provide the documents? They have to think, okay, is this a suspicious activity? Do I need to file a report with the Financial Investigation Agency of this suspicious activity? And it may very well be yes, and it may be no. For example, if Ron, during the transaction that he had or discussion he had with the bank, had shown the bank a withdrawal slip evidencing that he took it from
somewhere else,
the bank across, there's no necessarily suspicion right there. So it's a matter of the Cfatf requirements, so the bank has to look at those things, verify and identify and ensure that it prevents money laundering, terrorist financing, proliferation financing as much as it possibly can.
Understood. In regards to the assessors, of course, we know that they're joining us this week. Some have arrived, some will be arriving as of Wednesday. In the final analysis, when the territory and persons within the financial services industry reflect on the level of work that goes into making sure that the industry is up to par and up to standard, what would you like the average citizen to know and understand about this process and how important it is to the industry?
Well, I think I'd like the average person to understand that we who deal with this put in a lot of the work. The agencies take it very serious. We have a lot of experience and expertise on the international market. We are what you would consider experienced assessors. I've done assessment before.
Okay.
Several of colleagues who are involved in the process have done assessments, so we have a good idea. They have to also bear in mind sometimes we get very specific and technical, and I know people say, well, you know, you're making it difficult for us. But on the other end, the BVI punches way above its weight on the international arena in terms of we have a very large international finance center. And that is, so for example, when the assessment team come, they'll be looking at us from two perspectives, the domestic side and the international finance side. And they both carry two different risks. And persons who look at our risk assessment would see when we do our risk assessment, we risk assess them differently. So you would find at the domestic level, sometimes the risks are lower, given the nature of the activity. Then you look at the international finance side, the risks are higher because generally when the clients are not seen face to face, they're far away, they're high net worth people, they're in jurisdiction which you might consider a bit more risky than the BVI, that risk goes. So I think for the general public to understand, we have been preparing, we have been making steps to demonstrate compliance, and we have taken steps to put our best foot forward and demonstrate to the assessment team we're doing what we're supposed to do.
Well, Mr. Malone, I sincerely appreciate your time and effort in coming to our agency to speak and, of course, highlight this process as well as its expectation and, of course, what entails in having gotten us and the agency Financial Services Commission to this point. Continued success, and we thank you so much. Well,
we thank as well 284 Media for the support and for assisting us to get this out to the public today. Just one final thing I would say.
Sure.
While you said the Financial Services Commission, we just like the main agency that prepares, but as as I said, all those agencies that I mentioned earlier,
Both public and private sector.
both public and private, have put in a lot of work and have been preparing, and I think they've done a good job to prepare us for this coming week.
Exceptional. Viewers, that is all the time we have. Do have a beautiful rest of the day. Goodbye.